The sound came first, low rolling thunder on cracked asphalt, long before anyone saw the bikes. At the edge of Willow Creek, a forgotten town just off Route 18, people paused mid-step when that sound drifted through the afternoon air. Shopkeepers looked up from dusty counters, a waitress froze with a coffee pot mid-pour, and an old man on a bench tightened his grip on his cane. Everyone in Willow Creek knew what that sound meant. Trouble usually followed engines like those. At the center of town, beneath a sun-bleached banner that read "Community is Family," stood Sarah Whitman. She was holding a cardboard box filled with donated clothes, her arms aching but her jaw set. Sarah was 32, a widow, and the director of the Willow Creek Community Center, a title that sounded grander than it was. The center was little more than a converted warehouse with leaky pipes and peeling paint, but to the people who relied on it, it was everything. Sarah had learned early that hope wasn't loud. It didn't roar like engines or demand attention. Hope showed up quietly, in small acts, extra soup ladled into a bowl, a blanket folded with care, a listening ear when the world felt cruel. That was the kind of hope she tried to give every day. But lately, it felt like the world had decided Willow Creek didn't deserve hope anymore. Two men controlled most of the town's money and power, Harold Baines and Leonard Crowley. They were old, wealthy, and respected, at least on paper. Their names were etched on plaques at the courthouse and engraved on the donor wall of the hospital. People called them pillars of the community. Sarah called them what they were when no one else was listening: predators in pressed suits. They owned the buildings, the land, and the debts. They raised rents without warning, bought foreclosed homes for pennies, and shut down anything that didn't serve their interests. When Sarah had gone to them for help, just a small grant to keep the community center open through winter, they had smiled politely and said no. Charity makes people lazy, Harold had said, folding his hands over a gold-topped cane. Hardship builds character. That same week, they tripled the rent on the community center. Now the center was days from closing. Sarah knew it. The families who depended on it knew it too. What she didn't know was that the sound of those engines was about to change everything. The bikers rolled into town in a tight formation, leather jackets gleaming, patches stitched across their backs. They stopped in front of the old diner, engines idling like restrained beasts. Conversations died instantly. Fear had a way of doing that. At the head of the group was a man called Hawk. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard and eyes that had seen too much of the world to be easily shaken. To most people, he looked dangerous. To those who knew him, he was something else entirely. The bikers dismounted slowly. One by one, boots hit pavement. Sarah felt her heart pound as she watched from across the street. She'd seen biker gangs on the news, violence, drugs, destruction. Willow Creek was already fragile. It couldn't survive more chaos. Harold Baines and Leonard Crowley, however, seemed unconcerned. They sat on the diner's patio, sipping iced tea and watching the bikers with thin smiles. "Looks like the circus is in town," Leonard muttered. "Someone should call the sheriff." Harold waved a dismissive hand. "Let them posture. Men like that are all noise." Hawk walked into the diner first. The bell over the door jingled weakly. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and grease. He took off his helmet and set it on the counter, nodding at the waitress. "Afternoon," he said calmly. "We'll take whatever's hot." The bikers filled the booths, their presence heavy but strangely disciplined. No shouting, no threats, just quiet murmurs and patient waiting. Sarah found herself watching them despite her fear. Something about their stillness felt intentional. After they ate, Hawk paid the bill and left a tip that made the waitress's eyes fill with tears. The bikers stood, filed out, and crossed the street, straight toward the community center. Sarah swallowed hard as Hawk approached. "Ma'am," he said, removing his sunglasses. His eyes were softer up close. "Is this the Willow Creek Community Center?" "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We're closing soon, though." Hawk frowned. "Why's that?" She hesitated. Years of being dismissed had taught her caution, but something in his expression told her he was listening, not waiting to talk, not waiting to judge. "We can't afford the rent anymore," she said finally. "The owners raised it. Again." Hawk nodded slowly. "Who owns it?" Sarah glanced toward the diner patio where Harold and Leonard sat watching. "Them." Hawk followed her gaze. His jaw tightened, not in anger but in understanding. "Mind if we come in?" he asked. The bikers spent the next hour inside the community center. They listened as Sarah explained how the center fed seniors, tutored kids, and offered shelter during storms. They watched volunteers pack boxes with supplies they might not get to distribute. They saw the fear behind brave smiles. When Hawk stepped back outside, the sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across Willow Creek. Harold Baines rose from his chair, leaning heavily on his cane. Leonard followed, straightening his jacket. "Well," Harold called out, "seen enough charity for one day?" Hawk walked toward them, his boots slow and deliberate. "Yeah," he said, "I've seen enough," Leonard scoffed. "Then take your circus and move on. This town doesn't need your kind." Hawk smiled, not warmly but knowingly. "You're right," he said. "This town doesn't need us." He turned and raised his hand. The bikers moved instantly, spreading out, not threatening, not aggressive, just present. The air shifted. Harold's smile faltered. "What is this? Just a conversation," Hawk replied. "One you've been avoiding for a long time." People began to gather, drawn by curiosity and the promise of something different. Sarah watched from the steps of the center, her heart racing. Hawk spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You've built your lives on taking," he said, "taking homes, taking dignity, taking hope. You call it business. We call it cowardice." Leonard's face flushed. "You have no right." "No," Hawk interrupted gently. "We don't, but they do." He gestured to the crowd, the single mother clutching her son's hand, the elderly man with the cane, the waitress from the diner wiping her eyes. "You taught them that power belongs to those who hoard," Hawk continued. "We're here to teach you something else." Harold laughed nervously. "And what's that? You going to scare us into charity?" Hawk shook his head. "No, fear fades. Understanding lasts." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, handing it to Leonard. "What's this?" Leonard demanded. "Records," Hawk said. "Properties you bought through shell companies, bribes, illegal evictions. We did our homework." Leonard's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Harold's face went pale. "You think you're untouchable because you're old and rich," Hawk said quietly. "But you forgot something. The world is watching now." Sirens sounded in the distance, not rushing in but approaching steadily. The sheriff's car pulled up, followed by a state investigator's vehicle. Harold sank back into his chair, suddenly looking very small. The crowd murmured as officers approached. Questions were asked, documents were reviewed, handcuffs clicked softly but unmistakably. As Harold and Leonard were led away, Harold turned back, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "I was just doing business," he whispered. Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "No," she said, "you were stealing futures." The town exhaled as one. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek changed. Investigations uncovered more corruption than anyone had imagined. Properties were seized, rents were lowered, funds were redirected back into the community. The bikers stayed longer than anyone expected. They repaired the community center's roof, organized food drives, and taught kids how to fix engines and believe in themselves. They didn't ask for praise. They didn't ask for forgiveness for how they looked. They just showed up. On the day the community center officially reopened, rent-free, donated to the town, Sarah stood beside Hawk, watching children run through the doors laughing. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why us?" Hawk smiled, watching the kids. "Because someone once did this for me, when I didn't deserve it." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. As the bikers rode out of Willow Creek weeks later, the thunder of their engines sounded different. Not like a warning, like a promise. And long after they were gone, the lesson they left behind remained, etched not in fear, but in hope, that power means nothing without compassion, that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, and that even the hardest hearts can be changed when humanity finally stands together.